Even in a city where regular shootings are commonplace, the death of a 5-year-old in a gun battle causes us all pause. And today we'll be talking on the Opinion Show about gun violence in Cleveland. Joining me today in the show are Director of Opinion Betsy Sullivan and editorial writers Chris Evans, Sharon Broussard, and Ted Dyden. Chris, can you give us a few details about the shooting that happened last weekend?
Well, it was just horrible. I mean, Ramon, or Dink as he was known, was doing what every 5-year-old does on a Friday afternoon of a long holiday. He's playing in the backyard with friends, tossing a football around, and the two suspects apparently had an altercation. The police haven't said what exactly led to it, but the shooter had a target in mind, and he tried to hit that target and missed, and apparently hit Ramon, and the target, of course, fired back. So you have what would be an idyllic Friday afternoon scene suddenly shattered by gunfire.
And in the aftermath, we had the same statements that are made so frequently after shootings, that it's not about the guns that are in the hands of law-abiding people, it's about the guns in the hands of people who are banned by law from having them. We hear about this all the time, and yet it seems that the flow of guns into the hands of people that shouldn't have them is not stopped. Why can't this flow of illegal guns be stopped?
Well, I think there's several reasons, and part of it is the fault of the legislature and the federal government and their rules. You have a T. Hart Amendment, which makes it very hard to trace guns, even if you're with law enforcement. Ohio, of course, is one of the leading states in terms of lax gun laws. And the fact is that the law-abiding citizens have every right to have guns, and responsible gun owners are responsible gun owners. But where the money is in the black market. And the black market is fed by guns that are bought at gun shows. You can go to someone who's a quote-unquote private collector who's selling his collection, and all you need to produce is an Ohio driver's license. There's no background check, nothing. Even if you buy a gun from a federally licensed dealer, the background check takes like 30 seconds. They call an FBI database in I think it's North Carolina, and it runs your name through a criminal bank, to see if you've got a record. So the oversight is very lax, and you can go to gun shows, and I've been to gun shows where people buy multiple guns. And what's also funny is you go to gun shows and you see the same collectors over and over again, and their collection always seems to get bigger. It's like there's no monitoring of that. So, and then you have straw purchases where you have people going into, again, legitimate federally licensed gun dealers, and they have no criminal record. But they will buy guns for felons.
Which is illegal.
Which is illegal.
The frustrating thing here is that after every case that gets a lot of publicity, we hear again about the laxity of our gun laws, about the failures of our legislators to pass common sense reforms that would make it much more difficult along the lines that Chris laid out to buy guns for the illegal trafficking of weapons, and also that would allow law enforcement a far greater ability to trace guns, so that
right.
you can kind of get into this. Now, in this case, though, this is an 18 and a 19-year-old. They're not, they probably don't have felony records yet. So they could legally have acquired these weapons, but they didn't. They were kids who are probably part of a gang who, this is their, it's like a cigarette lighter in the old days, something that you have to have, like a cell phone in one pocket and a weapon in the other.
Well,
or a switchblade back
right,
in the old days.
and again, we don't know what circumstances led to the shootout, but this is the response now. I mean, the response isn't, in an alleyway, a fist fight. It's guns. and it's done in a public place.
Yeah, and let's talk, a little bit more about, Philip Morris has had a couple of good columns on this topic and topic of gun violence in the black community in general. And I think he hits on something when he says, like, if we sit around waiting for gun laws to occur and to be in place, I mean, I think that after those 20 first graders were shot and killed and really nothing happened, I mean, that was as shocking as it gets. So I don't put a lot of hope that that's going to happen fast, but I think in the meantime, poor communities, in this case, black community in Cleveland, and that side of town needs to kind of have a sea change about, like, how they approach those things and how young people think about guns and, what older people can do to kind of steer them away from settling disputes with a gun that could injure anyone and that, leaves a community bereft.
Ted, let me bring you into this. You believe in responsible gun ownership, and when you start to talk about changing laws, a lot of responsible gun owners think that could impede them from such purchases. What do you think the solution is for stemming the flow of the illegal guns without harming the rights of responsible owners?
Well, oddly enough, I don't disagree with much of what Chris just said. He and I are usually on the opposite end of this thing, but I think gun shows need to be more fully regulated. I think it's appalling that you're not allowed to trace guns, but that's all after the fact. I mean, you read about the journalist who was killed, and her father wrote something that saying and his first instinct is to say, let's build up the gun regulations. So that's I think the problem is not I don't want to use the old saw, but the problem are the people who are on the trigger. Anybody who wants to have a gun, criminal, old, young, or any mentally incompetent or not, is going to get one. Can steal one, have somebody buy one for him. The problem goes much deeper than that. And merely.
But there was a time 20 years ago where that was not, you couldn't make that statement the same way, because police did have far greater ability to trace the path of these illegal guns and to aim at the people that were producing them. And they can't do it now. I mean, as Chris pointed out, even the police have a hard time figuring out.
I don't disagree with you there. I think there ought to be, we ought to know where every gun used in a crime came from, how it was acquired, and that, and the roadblocks in front of that should be removed.
And in addition to that, gun manufacturers now have the technical ability to put trigger guards and even fingerprint guards on weapons so that they can't be trafficked, stolen, and misused by kids who might happen upon them, et cetera. And yet they're not doing it, which I think is really a shame. Now, Andy Parker, who wrote the op-ed about the death of his daughter, Allison Parker, the TV newswoman who was shot in Roanoke, he acknowledged in that op-ed that perhaps this guy who was deranged, as he phrased it, would have found another way to attack them. But he also talked about how easy it was for somebody whose own family knows that he's having problems because he's an adult to get firearms, and that there is a model legislation in California that allows family members to intervene in a court to try to keep firearms away from people who have shown violent mental illness. And he talked about how this legislation was actually before legislators in Virginia and didn't pass. So I do think that to say that there's so many guns that we can't do anything about it is kind of self-defeating.
I understand all that, but the problem is there are millions upon millions of guns out there. All the legislation in the world isn't going to change that. The problem, as I said, goes deeper to the people on the business end of the gun, who are doing the shooting, and and until we are willing to deal far more harshly with the perpetrators, the people who terrorize neighborhoods, and allow the police the latitude to bring these people to heel. Yep. There's just it's going to go on, and I don't care what you do with gun legislation. It's not going to stop it.
I think you know, one of the things that would help would be if there was a waiting period. So now, you know, you can go to a gun show or you can go to a dealer and walk out with a gun. You know, once they do what you, and I think if you had a 2 to 3 day waiting period where a thorough check could be done to see if there is a criminal record, or that's not to say that would be foolproof, but there would be a window where you could do due diligence, and that doesn't exist now.
So somebody's clean, you know, they go through the waiting period, buy a gun for one of these teenagers who shot the little kid, and he's got a gun. That's not going to stop anything.
Well, no, but you might find out that as you're running your check, that the person who's buying the gun is in a common law relationship or has a relationship with a felon.
Or you might not.
Or you might not. But I mean, it's even more blatant than that. I've gone and covered when the police do the gun buybacks, and they do. You get free credit card, you know, not credit card, but you get coupons and gift cards. There are people working the end of the line, and they have cardboard signs that say, "We will pay cash for your guns." This is right outside the police station.
I don't doubt that for a minute.
You know, this is, you know, you're looking at money or you're looking at a $25 Target gift card.
Yeah, I've been to gun shows too, and I've been just as appalled as you were.
Right.
You know,
But to me, when you talk to the police about that, as long as those people are standing on the sidewalk and they're in a public place, there's nothing the police can do.
Shoot 'em.
Well, they could do that, yeah, and they have done that.
Let's talk about the police, because this is something actually Sharon had mentioned when we had you know, one of our editorial board discussions about the shooting and killing of Ramon. And that is that the police are really frustrated, and they're expressing that frustration, the Cleveland police. I mean, you know, when Tamir Rice was shot by a police officer, there was still pain in the voice of the chief and of the mayor about that incident. It is hard to see a young child die, but their hands are tied by the fact that we have a legislature in Ohio that chooses to ignore the home rule rights that are in the Ohio Constitution.
Absolutely.
And not allow cities that recognize that they've got a gun problem enact their own gun laws. And, you know, the mayor is testing the limits of that again with his package of gun legislation that was passed earlier this year, but you know, and that'll probably end up in the courts. But it is a frustrating reality that law enforcement wants tougher laws, and they're not going to get them.
Right.
And I want to kind of dash your little thing about, you know, people serving a lot of time to, you know, prove to the world out there that you shouldn't use guns everywhere you want to or against anyone you want to. But, you know, these two people, like many of the people who killed people earlier this year, are going to go to jail for a long time. They might even get life, but I don't know if that has anything to do with what someone's going to do next week, the week after, or tomorrow about, you know, using a gun.
Well, it goes
seems to make a big difference.
Well, I'm sorry. It goes to the community responsibility too, you know, and the whole reaction to this thing. Not to throw this thing way off on a tangent, but this whole Black Lives Matter movement, you know, where, you know, it's getting behind the, you know, the using as the poster child Michael Brown, you know, he wouldn't be dead now if he hadn't robbed a convenience store, walked in the middle of the highway and not obeyed the police and then tried to attack the guy. That's where it starts. And if people concentrate on the, you know, on the police end of that rather than on the people who are breaking the law, and the community rallies behind the lawbreakers rather than the police and the people who are trying
but
to...
I would argue...
And Michael Brown, we are getting a little bit off, but Michael Brown was unarmed. And the other thing is that, you know, Black Lives Matter has to do both, you know. I mean, I think that's part of being an African-American in society, that you have to worry sometimes about gun violence in poor neighborhoods, and you also have to worry about, you know, police interactions with people who may not even be carrying a gun.
But what you have with this latest shooting is you have Calvin Williams, the police chief, asking for the community's help, and the mayor asking for the community's help. And to me, this is where the consent decree and that whole process is so important in restoring trust back in the police department, so the community. And there are people in the community who are aware of who are the illegal gun dealers, who are the bad guys with the guns that go around, you know, doing drive-by shootings, but they don't trust the police. They're not turning that information over. And I think one of the goals, I hope, with this consent decree and rebuilding that credibility is that the police and the community will establish a relationship that will help address these kinds of issues.
I understand there's an issue of trust. My reason for bringing that up is that the danger to young black males is not the police, it's other young black males in this society, and there's no question about that.
Yeah, but that's your perception. I think they would say
That's
both.
statistical.
No,
perception.
I understand that. I think they would say both, though.
But we're getting a little bit off. We'll have to end it there. If you have some thoughts about solutions to the gun violence problem in Cleveland, we'd love to know what they are. Please leave them in the comments where you found this show. We'll see you next time.